streaming. Let's go over to Google. They changed the way that the streaming works, so we might be live now. I can't tell. Only one way to find out. Go to YouTube. See if there is a video going. Oh my gosh, we are live.
Sweet.
Okay. Making goofy sounds. All right, so we are here to talk about elections and economic destruction. So I'm here with Kyle, and Kyle's got some more legal expertise. So we were both inspired by the Tim Pool's coverage, who everyone who wants to have at least a general idea of what on earth is going on in this election. Tim Pool is the baseline of who you should be following to be peripherally aware. But did you want to start off by talking about election stuff and then go into global economics?
Sure. So let's get started on first things first. Brand new news. North Carolina actually just got called for Trump. I don't know if you saw it. It's officially been called for Trump.
Oh,
so
I did
in
not.
This long line of consistent this long line of consistent back and forth of, is he going to get it? Is he not going to get it? Is Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, so on and so forth? Are all these things going to happen? At least we have one off the docket now. Cool, check mark it. North Carolina for Trump. So I believe that puts him up to like 238 versus Biden's 234 or 228, I believe it was. So, I mean, this is the issue that I keep running into is certification results. And I'm sure that most people are aware that there's an actual legal constitutional, process that actually goes down the line, and a legal declaration and certification of the ballots as well as the results, which for some reason is just being ignored by the mainstream media. And they're just saying Biden. But that's not correct. There is no winner yet because they're still counting ballots and there's also a contested election. But to move on to it, I actually wanted to bring up some of the lawsuit that's going on in Pennsylvania as well as Michigan. And it reminded me, yes, a little bit from Tim Pool, but overall, everybody has been kind of repeating this mantra of Bush v. Gore. And a lot of the mainstream media, as well as the Twitterverse, has been up in flames over, could this be a repeat of Bush v. Gore? And can this be stolen from the Democrats yet again, just like it was Al Gore in the year 2000? The answer is probably yes. Honestly, I think I gave the odds about a week ago at a 60-40 rate that that Trump would win.
I think that
and
was
the reason for it is a pretty simple one. He's argued.
Sorry, I was going to say that was the odds that Scott Adams gave to Trump winning 3 or 4 days ago as well. The Dilbert guy.
Oh, Dilbert? Yeah. So I personally gave it about a 60-40, maybe a 70-30 that Trump is going to win. And the reason for it is because it's, I'm gonna go with the old rhyme of history doesn't repeat itself, but it sure as hell rhymes. And it's rhyming. Right now we have the contested recount over in Michigan as well as Pennsylvania. And although Trump, which I think he's gotten used to, just says something and the media latches onto it and just goes with whatever he just said. And it's kind of like nailing Jello to the wall. While you're looking at his left hand, he's doing something else with his right. So he's arguing about, ballot fraud and dead people voting and everything like this, but he's not suing on those grounds. He's suing on the fact that there is a procedural issue of a violation of the 14th Amendment, that these ballots are not being counted the same way in all the counties. And they're not. In fact, this is actually supported by people in Twitter saying, yeah, we're allowed to cure ballots. And the Democrats are curing ballots.
It's one hell of an argument that you hear coming from the other side that, oh, are you going to disenfranchise all these people to stop the... And when you realize that they are the reason why these votes are being treated differently, that it was planned this way, you have a strange kind of Blazing Saddles situation where the left is putting a gun to their head and saying, don't make me shoot the prisoner. They're like, you caused. Why are you getting mad at other people who want to enforce the rules that have been in place? Have you gotten used to the rules not being enforced? Like, what's going on here? It's very strange the way that they cause these problems.
It's kind of like whenever
and then blame the other side in the hopes that people will forget the cause.
For anybody in middle management who's ever had to fire somebody, it kind of goes back to that same kind of mentality. It's like, well, how could you fire me? It's like, you violated the rules. You fired yourself there, buddy. Like, I didn't really do anything.
I'm just following procedure.
You committed the violation. Yeah, it's like, I have to enforce the rules. You knew what the rules are. You fired yourself. This is not on me. And so when it comes down to it, yeah, you guys wanted to change the election rules in the 11th hour. Of course there's going to be screw-ups, and more than likely they're going to, with most Supreme Courts, they follow tradition. If you're the one skewing on the side of non-traditional outcomes, you're probably going to be the one at the loss. And so that's where we come back to Bush v. Gore. This is exactly what they did. It was a 7-2 decision that actually came up. The only people who went against it, of course, was Justice Stevens and Ginsburg, of course. But in the end, it was just procedural differences. So that's all it was.
You've got, for those of listeners who don't know, Kyle, you've got some legal training, or certainly some legal knowledge. What for the lay person who has no idea what's going on? What is the relevance of Bush v. Gore to what's going on with Trump and Biden now? Just at a very, very basic level, because we're hearing about all this fraud, but there's supposedly this lawsuit.
Yeah.
Going.
Okay, so I'm going to try to do the Reader's Digest version. So basically, everybody makes mistakes in law, right? And a lot of people will count these as, well, technicalities under the law. Well, yeah, because we have to rely on the Constitution, and that's the job of the Supreme Court, is to ensure whatever is being done, especially on the federal level, must adhere to the standards and rules of the United States Constitution, one of which is the 14th Amendment, states that there must be equality under the law. And what they had in the Bush v. Gore is George Bush, when he won the election in 2000, Al Gore was the presumed winner for about 30 some odd days, 30, 40 days. And then when it finally came to the Supreme Court, because there was a legal objection due to the fact that there was an unfair recount, or they said it was unfair because these ballots needed a hand recount because the procedure wasn't the same in every single county.
So the ballots,
and some of them were being counted.
So the ballots were not being treated equally. So therefore, the citizens were not being treated equally under the law in a legal context of an election.
Absolutely. And so since the ballots and ergo the people, because that is an extension of the people's voice, were not being treated equally, in this case, it's the exact same. The Democrats in Michigan and Pennsylvania have allowed what's called vote curing, which is if they find, especially if they started counting the ballots early, they can see a ballot and they go, this one would normally be disqualified. Instead, they take time, call the person who the ballot is attached to, and see if they can correct the mistake in order to make it valid, not giving the equal opportunity for conservatives. So they would give it to Democrats and not conservatives.
And I can imagine how a person listening to this might be, well, wait, what's so unfair about asking, an individual to correct an error so that they get some representation? And it seems like a fair point, I guess. But
it is.
When you have large districts that are predictably Democratic, broadly Democratic, or broadly Republican, and if you are treating certain districts by one standard and certain districts by another in such a way that, an individual might receive fair enough treatment, but the group as a whole, the different standards will result in fairly large differences in votes that get through. Versus those that don't, you end up fudging the will of the respective groups that emerge from the voting process, and so one entire group gets disenfranchised, relatively speaking, by the different procedures. Would you say that's more or less accurate?
It's more or less accurate. Under the law, it's a simple transaction of numbers. It's basically if there's an equal opportunity to be disqualified, you lessen the likelihood of disqualification if you give only one side the opportunity to fix the mistake. And if that's intentional, that's going to be and that's not going to be equality under the law, and you're not treating people and votes equally under the law. Ergo, that would be a procedural violation of the United States Constitution.
I see.
And that kind of inequality is exactly what Bush v. Gore, that's what he won on last time. And when they actually went up to the proper by hand recount, it favored Bush by about 500 votes, and he won the election. So if Trump is able to do the exact same thing, there's probably going to be a high likelihood, seeing as 3 of the justices actually were lawyers on the Bush team back in the year 2000. Amy Coney Barrett, Justice Roberts, and Brett Kavanaugh all were lawyers in favor of Bush in the year 2000, and now they are currently Supreme Court justices.
So here's the crazy scenario that I can't get out of my head. Trump has basically gone through 4 years of the roughest criticism and obstruction that any president I know of has been through, at least in recent history. And they've been rejecting the results of the 2016 election because of the very strong evidence, proof even, of Russian collusion in the 2016 election. Sorry, I shouldn't tell jokes like that, deadpan. And so what if Trump anticipated this sort of problem? What if Trump anticipated it coming down to a legal challenge? Because it's hard to look at, of all the justices, of all the judges he could have chosen to bring to the Supreme Court, Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett at the same time. This would be the 4D chess move of American history. Probably the greatest political maneuver since Cicero taking down Catalina.
I bet you I can hit you from left field even on the 4D chess level right now.
Okay.
All right. So this is something that a lot of people have overlooked. Okay. I personally think, and there's a reason that I gave it a 60-40 or even a 70-30 in favor of Trump. Okay. And it's because there's a lot of news that a lot of people miss because there's just so much of it. And it's really hard to decipher what is and is not important. Well, I will simply say this. Probably one of the most interesting developments that we saw for a while, and probably something that we missed on the idea of how far Trump thinks ahead, is one politician. One politician. Okay? I don't know if you remember this. Back in the year 2008, when Barack Obama was elected president, do you remember what happened to his Senate seat?
Yes, I was reminded of it recently, but I didn't know, I didn't remember until 2 days ago. So why don't you act as if I had no idea?
His Senate seat was sold by Rod Blagojevich, who was convicted of selling the seat and corruption charges, and he was put in federal prison for a rather long time.
But I thought
Trump just
hang on, Kyle, that can't be correct, because Instagram and Facebook insistently tell me that fraud is exceedingly rare in the United States.
Yes, absolutely.
That seems. I think we can fact check that by appealing to statistical improbability, can't we?
Absolutely. In fact, I trust everything Twitter tells me. But Rod Blagojevich was just pardoned by Trump and has been more than willing to say everything about the underhanded tricks that the Democratic establishment has in Chicago, in New York, in New Jersey, and a few other places that have been Democratic strongholds for a really good long time. And honestly, if he pardoned Rod Blagojevich in order to learn the secrets so he could lay traps, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
Well, and wasn't Biden's chief of staff screenshotted admitting that elections were stolen or elections were rigged as well? And it's like, this puts us in a very uncomfortable situation of saying, okay, either the elections are not rigged and these people in very high up positions who are running it all are lying, or if they're honest in telling the truth, then the truth sort of undermines the narrative that everything is good. Like, it has to be one of those two things, right?
I find that to be, I think it's the faint connection to power that some people have that normally gets put into the Alex Jones category of conspiracy, where, well, this guy is in charge of blah, 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 blah. Well, that doesn't mean that he had any power over elections of the past.
Of course not. Of course not. But you have to imagine that someone who ends up in the position of Joe Biden, former vice president, senator for 20% of America's history, and now occupant of the office of president-elect, apparently. Like, if you can end up
there is
in
no
that, that is contested, controversial information because I saw the sign behind. But anyways, someone who ends up in that position has to know people. They have to have some connections, and they have to have some idea of how the fundraising and the demographic coalition building of politicking happens. And so if someone like that says, oh yeah, they are rigged, that's because they are. And they might be just trying to appeal to public sentiment, but then they're lying, right? Or if they're telling the truth.
So I've always found this as kind of in that beautiful world of gray. So it's because I don't really find any conclusion from that statement, because for the most part, everybody is agreeing that, the elections are rigged, and, it's a lot of people look at it towards the Democrats. Like, they're the ones who keep, how long has it been a stereotype that dead people vote for Democrats?
Oh yeah. Well, you look at some of these Republican senators. So the weirdest case, and this is the absolute rebuttal to the there is no fraud, there is no widespread fraud. The first Project Veritas drop that we saw was a vote harvester using illegal methods to basically coerce elderly people into voting. And she was a paid operative for a Republican. But she was vote harvesting for Democrats. It was a very, very weird situation. But regardless of who he wanted to win, it was a Republican doing it. So,
yeah, she was. So watching that, she was working on the case for Republicans, all the other down ballots in favor of Democrats.
Yeah, I know I'm laggy. We're just cutting in and out. I'll do the best I can with the internet I have.
You just sound like you're really, really slow. Like you have like somebody who's talking just post-stroke.
Oh, well. We'll just pretend I've been drinking all day and call it that.
There we go. Yeah. You're just a rampant alcoholic drinking your infamous Rainier.
You can get drunk on this if you drink about it.
That was perfect timing, by the way. That's
yeah.
So this is an area where, let's say that Biden does win. Okay. Let's say that for some reason the procedural vote against Biden doesn't work, and it doesn't go in the same direction, regardless of the absolute similarities due to Bush v. Gore, regardless of the insistence from the New York Times saying, no, this isn't like Bush v. Gore. Yes, it is. Go read the case. And then actually go read the lawsuits from the Trump administration, and you'll see, wow, this is almost a 1-for-1. I could pretty much print one out and change the states and change the president names, and bam, you've pretty much got the same lawsuit.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but we should do a quick summary of the case as I understand it, and I haven't read the case, but you have. But it sounds like the case is, some of these. Oh no, we did explain it earlier. The mail-in ballots being allowed to be cured and stuff.
Yes,
okay, sorry. Carry on.
Yep.
My mistake.
You're fine. So let's say that regardless of the similarities, the legal victory doesn't happen for Trump, and Biden gets in office. Okay, we've already seen his COVID, uh, the head of the COVID response team is already requesting a 4 to 6 week, potentially 8 week full nationwide lockdown and a nationwide mask mandate.
What could go wrong?
So, yeah, what could go wrong? But this is what I was talking about in the realms of economics. Do by chance, what powerhouse of the United States and how we have our power throughout the world? We have it militarily and we have it economically. Okay. We have been told by Europe on a multitude of occasions that they don't want the United States to intervene militarily, and they don't want to rely on us military faith in the United States anymore, and they don't want us involved. And personally, I'm all for that. But secondarily, you also have to worry about economically. We have a lot of economic power in the world, and a lot of it is due to the stability of our currency. If I were to ask you, ballpark, what percentage of almost all consumer market revenue is earned during the Christmas season? What do you think it would be?
Oh,
how much of their yearly revenue do you think that they make over the Christmas period?
This is a complete shot in the dark. I'm going to guess 40%.
It's 20.
20, okay.
Yep. So about 1/5 of their entire revenue is earned over a 2-month period.
Which is a lot more than in 1 out of 12 months. Assuming we call the entire December season Christmas.
Yes. And I would say, yeah, it is. Because, yeah, you've got Hanukkah you've got Christmas in there, you've got Christmas Hanukkah Kwanzaa in there, you've got, what's the Seinfeld one?
Oh, Festivus.
Festivus, thank you. A Festivus for the rest of us. You know, I actually used to celebrate that too. Yeah, I used to celebrate that too. I used to actually get a metal pole and put it up in my living room.
There's plenty of uses for that.
When you have a fifth, when you have a fifth of your revenue coming in over a 1.5 to maybe 2-month period, and you want a lockdown right after that, and I know full well that this wouldn't come until January 20th, right when they came in, but you have to remember that they're already talking that they want a nationwide lockdown now. Dr. Fauci has already said, hey, we don't want we should look at a nationwide lockdown, even though the WHO has explicitly stated that nationwide lockdowns are to be used as an absolute last ditch effort, and it more than likely does more harm than good.
Yeah. Well, and this is the you have to laugh so you don't cry, because everything that the left has done against Trump in attacking him for being basically a Manchurian candidate for Russia and a Russian agent, the Hunter Biden laptop issue basically proved was the case for Biden. He seems to be in the pocket of and economically accountable to China, and there's a clear conflict of interest there, and there's no it seems so obvious that he would benefit if more manufacturing went back to his friends over there, if he has strong business ties to Chinese business interests, which he seems to have.
Well, I think it was just the recent poll. I have to look back into it. I was reading it the other day. It was around 3 to 7% of people, had they known about the Hunter Biden laptop story, they would not have voted for Biden.
Yeah.
And
this is the other crazy thing. Suppose the Hunter Biden laptop thing, suppose we get strong enough evidence that proves that it is in fact a sham. I mean, it should be investigated because it seems pretty compelling. The laptop that the FBI was given seems like pretty strong evidence. But suppose it's misinformation somehow. It's still stronger currently than what we had for Trump as far as his relationship to Russia, and yet social media has been censoring that and stopping that from being able to be seen by the majority of people. And there's no doubt that that had a strong impact on the election.
Oh yeah, and it's really interesting how, because now we've seen the full because let me restart how I was going to say that. A lot of us didn't really understand how powerful the media was because a lot of us saw through the media sham. Okay, I have a couple friends of mine. One of them lives over in Boston, and he still didn't know that the lie about there's good people on both sides, that Trump was favoring Nazis and calling Nazis good people.
Oh God,
he was still believing that.
If anyone hasn't seen it, go back and watch his interview there. He is so explicit. He even says, and I'm not talking about the Nazis and white supremacists. They're bad people, blah, blah, blah. He does his Trump voice. They're terrible. They're the worst. There is, like, he's talking.
They should be condemned completely.
He was so explicit in who he was talking about. He said there were innocent people who didn't know anything about that, who cared a lot about this statue and didn't want it taken away. Totally reasonable position. And he was, the fact that that could be taken so far out of context and that people could forget it is just... Is something going on with my screen here?
Yeah, it's actually really funny to listen to on this side. So You've got a lot of lag, obviously.
Oh, geez.
I normally don't bring it up during the stream. Like, it's literally, I'm trying to listen to it, and it'll just be really slow. And then you just look over fast. It's like, oh, okay.
You have to choose a better platform than Skype. You have to switch to Zoom as the proper COVID.
I think you need better than internet potatoes. Like, maybe we can try it on Discord in the future, or I just recommend an Ethernet cable instead of Wi-Fi.
I'm on an Ethernet cable. This is, I don't know if this is visible. I don't know if this is visible. So this is my Ethernet cable right here.
Huh.
So I think it might just be Skype. I don't know, but. In any case, we'll deal with that later.
Yes. Yeah, so as you were saying, you were putting into the idea like the Hunter Biden laptop, and the fact like, yeah, you have a significantly better case against Biden regarding this Biden laptop than ever what was put forward in the Russian investigation, and I think we can see now like the full power of the media, where them just not talking about something. Just not including anything about the Biden laptop, not including anything, just even not showing the rest of the context from the very good people speech. They don't know. People don't tend to, and now we actually see the genuine shift of how much power they still retain, and it's significantly dangerous for for our republic, for our election system. And genuinely for knowledgeable people. I no longer think we have a free press. And I think to readjust the alignment of the First Amendment to have a free press, we honestly need an antitrust lawsuit to break up a lot of the multimedia companies, such as Turner and all the others. And the Murdochs, the Turners, everything that's involved here, this needs an absolute antitrust breakup. Disney needs to be broken up. I would say the Turner company needs to be broken up. And anything regarding... with a C at the end of the acronym needs to be broken the hell up. ABC, NBC, MSNBC, everything. Just gone. I want to quote Kennedy on it, is shatter it into a million pieces and like dust to the wind. I butchered the hell out of that phrase, but the statement remains true.
Yeah, what to do about these
Break
companies?
Break it to a million people and scatter it to the winds. There we go.
What to do about those companies is a tough question, because there's I don't remember if I talked about we talked about this before, but the danger of like breaking up Standard Oil, it didn't actually result in Standard Oil losing power. They just broke up into a bunch of different interlocking sub-companies that remained vertically integrated and essentially maintained the structure of Standard Oil with even less oversight, because now there was the mirage of having taken care of the problem. So I I don't see any way around the inevitability of people having to break away at a personal level from that. And we can take other steps to try to make that easier. But at the end of the day, I think it will come down to people having to consciously be like, having to recalibrate their inner trust barometer to say, you know, these people who are further outside my circle of familiarity, I have to distrust by default rather than trust by default.
I think we could pretty much solve almost all of these problems with one legal change. And it is swapping the necessity, or it would swap the proving party in libel suits and defamation and slander suits. I would say, because we right now we have it in our court system where, let's say that I say something untrue about you and it slanders your name, it defames your character, or I've libeled you in print.
20 paces at dawn.
The problem that what?
20 paces at dawn.
Yeah. The problem that we have here is the fact that if I say something untrue, you have to prove me false.
Right.
Okay? And that's a really hard thing to do, is to obviously prove a negative. Go to Christopher Hitchens on why that's so difficult. But it is a matter of the person who is making the allegation. If you are going to say something and it slanders the person's character, it defames them, or even you've libeled them in print, it may well be on the person who's the defender to prove, yeah, here you go, this is true, here's this evidence, and there you go. And then the suing party should have to pay all legal fees if it's been proven, yes, this is in fact true or true enough. But for some of these things where, like, the media has lied about Trump, where it says, yeah, he's just saying this is a good, fine people thing, and you completely leave out the context, that's a defamation of character, except for the fact that it's done to a public individual. Him being in the public limelight, you have a lot more of a broad power to slander and libel these people because they've been put into the public eye, or they've chosen to be in the public eye. And I don't think that's true. I don't think that should be the way it is. It is, if you want to run for public office, if you want to represent the people, you should not give carte blanche to almost anybody to lie about you without consequence.
That's one possible solution, and it would solve this problem. My concern is that it might create another set of problems related to libel law. There was a book written several years ago by Nick Cohen, the sort of token leftist liberal who writes for the British webzine, or I guess magazine or newspaper, The Spectator. And he wrote a book several years ago called You Can't Read This Book. And it was about the horrendous libel suit culture that existed in the legal world, such that Russian oligarchs could sue Russian newspapers for writing op-eds in Russian on Russian sites because they were accessible on British servers in Britain and were therefore subject to British libel law. And even if the stories were true, that wasn't an absolute defense from libel suits. Now, obviously, that's an extreme case, but there is a bit of a slippery slope when it comes to where you put the burden of proof. Now, we were talking earlier about vague heuristics for deciding what's more likely. For example, did fraud happen or did it not? Well, we don't know. We don't have strong evidence, but there are a lot of red flags. And we, not being possessors of the monopoly of force that are the government, have the privilege of not having to prove our case as to why we might believe something to be more likely than another option. But when you have the power of the state at your back, as would be the case in, for example, a libel suit, or any lawsuit for that matter, that's where the burden of proof being on the accuser becomes stronger. And
sure.
there is a very tricky First Amendment balance act you have to do. And libel cases really are the strong case against the First Amendment. It's not shouting fire in a crowded theater. That was a stupid example, always has been a stupid example. It was bad in the initial invocation. It's never been good since.
Simply go to Brandenburg versus Ohio.
Yeah. But libel, where the rubber meets the road as far as what do we really mean by this freedom of speech thing and how far does it go? And it's not an easy question.
Yeah. So, and this is where I understand the concern. The problem is that I understand full well I never end up wanting to give the state more power or absolve them of responsibility for proving their case. I don't want to give them any more leeway than they already tend to get. Mm-hmm. Okay. On the other hand, I do see a problem with there are two warring factions here, one of which is the media and the other one is the government, both of which lie.
Right.
Okay. Both of which lie to the people so profusely that it makes us sick to our stomach on it. We just want to turn off the TV. We don't want to listen to the media because we know they lie that badly. And that's where I think that I want to actually pull a page out of Obamacare. And yeah, you can scold me all you'd like, but cool. If you have anything more than 50 employees, if you say something and you slander the shit out of someone, yep, absolutely skyrocketed the standard. If you have a reach like Fox News does, like MSNBC and CNBC.
How about South Park? Does South Park slander people?
No, they fall under satire.
But isn't that slander? Can't satire be slander? No. Muslims certainly think so. In the case of certain cartoons,
that's their own issue.
Yeah. What is the difference?
That's their own issue.
What's the difference between slander and satire?
Slander and satire?
Yes.
One is being presented as a fact. One is being presented as a fact.
You don't think satire, the effectiveness of satire rests on an assumption that there is some grain of truth?
No, I follow on the very simple principle of politicians and media tell lies to cover up the truth, while satirists tell lies to tell it.
I kind of disagree. I think that satire, and by the way, I'm not saying that satire should be banned by any stretch of the imagination. I just think that it's a trickier line to walk and that there isn't a clear or easy line that we can draw legally between what is satire and what is defamation. We have to make a distinction, but it's not an easy one. It's like distinguishing pornography from art sometimes. And like we can make that distinction, but it's very difficult to lay out and articulate in legally clear language.
You're right. On the other hand, I also find it is and this is no insult to you personally, I find it to be a repugnant argument. And especially when you look at South Park, which is literally on Comedy Central versus Fox News, I find that to be a morally repugnant argument due to the fact that I think that you're taking an insulting approach to anybody's individual intelligence. So if you have to try to do a reductionist argument to try to say, well, is South Park or insert satirist, show here, such as if you want to put it on Adult Swim, if you want to put it on Comedy Central, if you want to put it on a comedy network, you're going to have a very hard time arguing the idea that people would take this as genuine news. Whether or not you take it as real, that's up to the viewer.
Fair enough.
That's up to the viewer, such as why a lot of people used to take Jon Stewart on The Tonight Show. Not The Tonight Show. What the hell? The Daily Show.
They believed that was
The Daily
news.
Show.
They believed that was news.
No, they didn't see it was news. They got news from it. They didn't believe it was the news. They got news from it because they did talk about contemporary world events. On the other hand, they never presented themselves as a news show. It was a comedy commentary show on daily events. That's it. That is not, and if anybody were to, if you were to put that same show on Fox News, that's a completely different issue than on Comedy Central.
Sure. And I see the distinction you're making in how these different media formats label themselves. And a viewer should, if they are thinking rationally, should be able to say, what I am watching is comedy. Therefore, the opinions that I'm hearing should not be taken as literal fact. But
Sure.
let us imagine that the human mind works in such a way that sometime through this act, the mind loses track of what genre of media it's hearing. Suppose they're halfway through a George Carlin act, for example, and maybe they forget that George Carlin is just a comedian. He's not really a political commentator. Okay. He's not a philosopher. He's just a comedian, you know. So you shouldn't take his perspective of things as fact. But do you think people do that?
Do you think yourself to be a good driver?
That is a classic statistical question. I like to think of myself as a good driver.
There's a reason I asked. Don't worry.
Yes. Oh,
I'm not trying to divert from your question.
I'll go through. Yes, of course I'm a good driver. I am better than average as a driver.
Well, you're not.
As are most people, right?
No, the thing is that you're not. And yeah, I understand where you're going with it. But the thing is that I'm a shitty driver just the same as everybody else. On occasion, I get really pissed off and change lanes without signaling, regardless of not owning a BMW. The thing is that we tend to get brought up into this light that other people are stupid, irrational, and just silly. A lot of these pretty much everybody on Earth, if you follow economics, it's pretty much everybody is making the best rational decision they can with the information they've got. Okay. Now, not everybody has the highest IQ to be able to, bring that rationale to the forefront and make the best choice with it. But more often than not, people make good choices. There's a reason that you don't fear getting on the road every single day almost, because you have a really good idea that this person who's about to pass me in the opposite lane is a rational actor who doesn't just want to go, head to head with me in a car accident going 60. So that rational thought, when you bring up this weird assumption of, well, what if they're in the middle of a George Carlin skit? Will they forget that he's a comedian? Well, I would say probably not. And I feel that if there is one, I think it would be 1 in a million people who would sit through George Carlin going, man, this is a credible news source who I should get genuine ideas basing my political philosophies.
I think that most people who watch George Carlin,
I think they can take inspiration from it, but not.
They understand consciously that they are watching a comedy act the entire time, and yet somehow, contrary to their rational statements of what should or should not influence their political opinion, they will walk away from that act having had their mind shifted slightly in some direction.
Sure,
but that same thing applies with satire. And so free speech in this, and I'm not saying I am still pretty hardcore free speech absolutist. But as far as the concerns of libel are concerned, I think they do apply to satire, because I guess the best way I could explain this is through a recent documentary that got released by Netflix called The Social Dilemma, in which a bunch of...
I haven't seen it yet. I know you told me to watch it, but I haven't seen it yet.
I would give it 3.5 stars out of 5, because it does such a good job of outlining the persuasive techniques that these social media companies use that are not appealing to your rational faculties at all. It's pure hindbrain emotional association and stimulus response triggers and so forth. And it's very, very scientifically programmed to appeal to the non-rational aspect of human psychology. And it works. And I thought the most important part of the film was when they were interviewing some of these software engineers who've all been educated at a persuasion lab, a persuasion school, where they basically teach you to hypnotize people through social media technology. And many of these guys are saying, you'd think that if you were on the team who created these and programmed them, you'd be immune to them. But the funny thing is, we get addicted to these things just like everyone else because they're designed to work on human minds, and we're humans too. And so just because they designed them doesn't mean they're not immune to them. And if you think of satire as a kind of hack, if you will, and I don't want to say this to attack satire. I think satire is a beautiful thing and a fun thing, but it can influence people's perspectives to say, give you a negative view of a certain president, maybe in all kinds of little death by a thousand stings ways. And you can end up with the same psychological result as direct allegations that are false, but without actually making any allegations.
But you're skewing the argument in the direction. I mean, nobody believes that Jimmy Fallon is a newscaster. Okay, no. He's a nighttime daily. He's a nighttime comedy host, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the same thing goes with Jay Leno. The same thing goes with almost all of them. And satire comes down to in fact, here, let me bring up one specifically.
Tucker Carlson.
Do you think John Oliver is funny?
No, I don't find John Oliver particularly funny. Other people might. He might be objectively funny, but I never watched him that much. I don't know, to be totally honest.
I genuinely encourage you, if you can find things and he has a channel on YouTube. I encourage you to watch him. Go watch his first and second seasons. Okay, even the ones that were political were funny. Even if I didn't agree with it, it was still funny. And now I want you to go watch one of his most recent episodes, maybe the last 2 or 3. And you're going to notice a huge difference. Not just the fact that he's in a singular studio with no audience and there's no laugh track available because of COVID, but just in general, he's not doing anything funny. He's actually not making jokes. He's not making satire. He's literally just reading things that are going on and then insulting the people who are in charge of it. I explicitly remember one part where he literally just played a news clip. That's all it was. He just played a news clip and he goes, first off, F you. And second, how dare you do this? And then it was just a scolding session. There was no comedy involved. And regardless of it being comedy, it was still attempt at satire, which it's just skewed into, British man yells at American politicians.
So if you were to label that as in a genre of media, what would you call that? In a technical term, what would you call what you're seeing as this is what they are trying to do? Is it news or is it comedy? What is the purpose of this set here?
He represents himself as comedy. He is a comedian.
Mm-hmm.
He represents himself as a comedian. He is on a private channel regarding his show as something comedy-based. And he is just unfunny. Nobody really laughs at Samantha Bee, but she's still on Comedy Central. So it's going to be, it would be very liberal ideas of what would be satire. But if you are on a news channel, something that someone would genuinely take as news, yeah, you're going to have a pretty high restriction. If it is found that you said something that is a direct lie, and you know it's a lie, you hid context, such as the Sandman issue, or the Nicholas Sandman issue, as well as the Trump, the Nazis are good people kind of thing. In all honesty, no, I don't think that you should be immune from prosecution from that. And I think that trying to label satire as the same thing as large broadcast news networks such as ABC, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News, that is such a disheartening argument because the person making it is nothing but disingenuous on its face.
Well, no, I think we're in agreement on this. I think we're in agreement that the label that is ostensibly attached to a particular media, whether it's on television or elsewhere, isn't always honest. So a news channel might present itself as news, but it's really entertainment. Or a comedy might present itself as comedy, but it's actually a genre of philosophy and commentary.
Sure.
or something like that. So what if the most accurate label for something that is presenting itself as comedy but isn't funny, but is just repeatedly batting and emotional associations into the viewer's head and speaking in a kind of implied royal we all find this offensive. What if the best label for that is programming?
I think it comes down to the difference of commentary versus news. And so this is a hard division between what we find as legitimate news and illegitimate news. And if you remember right, the Bill O'Reilly lawsuit, as well as the Tucker Carlson lawsuit, as well as the, oh God, what is her name? MSNBC, really, really short hair.
Rachel Maddow.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel Maddow. All three of those commentators have been sued, and all three of them use the defense of we are commentary, and no one in their right mind would genuinely believe we are actual news.
So maybe we need a new legal standard, a new legal threshold that most people don't have to meet to exercise free speech. But if you want to call yourself news, then you have to subject yourself to this higher standard. Maybe that would be a legal, it's a voluntary subjection in order to apply this label. That could be a solution.
I would say, in all honesty, I mean, we have multitude underneath the telecommunications broadcasting acts and like decency laws, like through the FAA, or not the FAA, but the FCC. Honestly, I feel like we already have the legal framework to be able to do this, which is just a strict prohibition on the ability for have commentary news in the primetime slot. That's it. If it is new, prohibited from giving commentary in the primetime hour. You read the news. That's it. If they want commentary, they can go earlier or they can go later.
Well, what's wrong with people listening to commentary? Like
there's absolutely nothing. But if you're going to present yourself as a news channel, I believe that the vast majority of your watchers during primetime should be receiving news, not commentary.
So we're going in with the frame that the everyone assumes that the primetime slot is reserved for news. Then,
yes.
Okay. That assumption granted, then yeah, that would make sense. But there would have to be some standard for establishing what a news channel is, instead of a commentary channel. I think Alex Jones had to resort to that defense as well. But of course,
nobody in their right mind thinks Alex Jones is news.
I learn all kinds of interesting news from him. I think he is a legitimate source of information. It astounds me how many people have been forced to admit that, God damn it, Alex Jones was right about turning the frogs gay. I mean, obviously that was a oversimplification and a little bit eccentric, but he was way ahead of the curve on that. And it's obviously there's entertainment that's been mixed with the news, but it's still it's a language you have to learn to speak, and it's a gray area. It really is. And you can get news from non-news channels.
Sure, but just because you are commentary or a satirist does not limit your ability to be correct. You are allowed to be correct, and that's actually why people liked George Carlin in the first place, is because he was very correct on a lot of his satirical commentary. But nobody took George Carlin as a newscaster.
Well, let me
people take Tucker Carlson. People take Tucker Carlson as a newscaster. People take Rachel Maddow as a newscaster. Same thing with Bill O'Reilly and a whole bunch of others on MSNBC, CNN, and NBC. When they are taken as newscasters and they give commentary, and you put them on a primetime slot to be receiving Fox News, MSNBC News, ABC News, and you're giving them commentary, I believe that is a subversion of what the expectations of news genuinely is. And I believe there should be, or I believe there actually is, legal framework to prohibit such commentary on primetime airwaves
Well, here's where it gets
due
real.
to the broadcasting decency.
Well, here's where it gets real tricky, in my opinion. Is the expectation when you watch news, is it that everything that is presented to you will be factually true and verified? Or is it that you will walk away from having watched that better informed about the relevant current events? Because those two things aren't the same. And the best example I can think of demonstrating this is NPR, who does a phenomenal job of presenting pretty much true stories, better probably than 99% of the other outlets out there. And yet, only by presenting, constrained only to presenting true stories, still does a brilliant job of slanting the presentation like more and more each year too, harder and harder to the left. And so you can tell completely true stories in a newsworthy fashion in a way that is still dramatically misleading.
So you know I used to be a general manager of a newspaper, correct?
I did not know that.
Yeah. So I was in charge of my college newspaper, and I know it's nothing special because it's. But I also used to work alongside the Paulsbo. Oh God, what is it? The Paulsbo Independent, I think it was. I can't remember.
I was fired like from my college newspaper.
I was the general manager. But I also used to work alongside I believe it was like the North Kitsap. It was like the Paulsbo based up in Seattle, or up in Washington, the Paulsbo based like small independent media newspaper, right? And it sold rather well. It was actually a really, and more often than not, like they had a lot of journalistic, like professional journalistic standards that when I was in college and I was learning from my journalism classes, they did not teach. They taught how to write, but they did not teach the standards of journalism. Not teach why it is important to present all of the story without your slanted bias, because it is your job to inform the readers, not propagandize the readers, not to slant the readers or try to get them over to your argument. That is what the opinion column is for, and that's supposed to be the professional standard for especially the editors.
Yeah. Well, and here it gets really tricky, and I don't want to attack NPR too hard because I have no doubt that there are some very, very serious journalists who, whatever their personal biases may be, really put in the extra effort to present as unbiased and objective presentations of the stories that they want. Now, as it happens, I have heard from people, Tim Pool and Vox Day among them, who were literally paid to write stories that never got published. In some cases, even paid to not write stories, which is its own crazy. And so you can, if you are a manager of a news organization, you can theoretically, or not so theoretically actually, send out 100 journalists, all of whom do totally honest and totally legitimate stories about a variety of different things. And you as the manager go through and pick 20 of them that conform to your worldview and reject the other 80 that don't conform enough or don't conform at all. And from totally pristine and accurate reporting, still present an extremely biased perspective of the world to your audience. Now, is that legitimate news? I don't know.
Yeah, that's absolutely. So you remember Barry Weiss, right?
Vaguely.
Okay, so Barry Weiss is the very, very slight to the right writer for the New York Times.
They're token. So they're token black person.
Yeah, absolutely. So she just recently resigned from the New York Times. but she wrote her resignation letter because she felt that she was bullied out of her position. Um, I actually have her resignation letter in front of me. I'll read one small snippet from it. It says, "My own forays into wrongthink have made me the subject of constant bullying by colleagues who disagree with my views. They have called me a Nazi and a racist. I have learned to brush off comments about how I'm writing about the Jews again. Several colleagues perceived to be friendly with me were badgered by coworkers. My work and my character." Oh,
isn't Weiss a Jewish name?
she's Jewish. She is Jewish.
This is another one of these Jewish Nazis. I see.
Yeah, I guess. My work and my character are openly demeaned on company-wide Slack channels. Slack is the in-company like forum that they write with each other, where masthead editors regularly weigh in. There, some coworkers insist I need to be rooted out if this company is to be truly inclusive, truly an inclusive one, while others post axe emojis next to my name. Still, other New York Times employees publicly smear me as a liar and a bigot on Twitter with no fear that harassing me will be met with appropriate action because they never are.
Clearly sexism.
So Barry Weiss, yeah. So it's when you have to deal with these kind of statements from people who are barely right wing, like she was. If you read some of her pieces, like that's not Kyle Chapman trying to talk about anything important.
Isn't she?
This is not Alex Jones.
Isn't she a never Trumper too?
I believe she is.
Yeah.
So she says, I do not understand how I've allowed this kind of behavior to go on inside your company in full view of the paper's entire staff and the public. I certainly can't square how you and other Times leaders have stood by while simultaneously praising me in private for my courage. Showing up for work as a centrist at an American newspaper should not require bravery. So she even classifies herself as a centrist. It's like she is not, and she was the furthest to the right person over at the New York Times. If you read some of her old articles, they were not very praising of Trump. She was a never Trumper. She even identifies herself as a centrist, and even in her own letter, she goes, when we can assure ourselves of job security and clicks by publishing our 4,000th op-ed arguing that Donald Trump is a unique danger to the country and the world, and self-censorship has become the norm. When you are faced with this, even her, as a never-Trumper centrist, is considered right-wing, who now loses or has to resign from her job because of that kind of bias to the left. I'm like, there is no kind of credibility in the media anymore.
Oh, absolutely, and this sort of I think illustrates my problem of the trickiness of it all, because I mean, like NPR, I don't think the New York Times is as good as NPR, but the New York Times doesn't do a bad job of fact checking most of what they write. They've gotten it hilariously wrong sometimes, but on the whole, they managed to present in a factually true fashion such a biased and misleading perspective of what's going on, and depictions of the people that they don't like. Their choice, and my favorite, the one that always sticks out to me on the page, is when I read an article that says, so and so, who, and whatever that epithet that they attach after someone's name to introduce them, tells you everything you need to know about what the New York Times thinks of this person. Do they say, who once met with someone who once attended a meeting that was attended by white nationalists? Like, that's the sort of crazy roundabout way that they'll go after someone who literally did nothing extreme in their lives. But they can do that.
Which is weird because, I mean, David Nywert, I'm assuming. He used to work for the SPLC. He's been in the company of white supremacists dozens of times, and it's because he was writing about them. Yeah. I've been in the presence of white supremacists. No, he's definitely not. I've met him on a multitude of occasions. He actually wrote a piece about me for the SPLC that was rejected. So he was.
Why was it rejected?
David Nywert and I. Actually, this is it's a small little interesting story. So David Nywert and we ended up meeting at it was a political issue thing that he was kind of promoting his book. And he, in his book, was talking about Patriot Prayer, of which I had some association with for a while.
Mhm.
And
Good
the
old
one
days.
thing he talked about is that Patriot Prayer being a white supremacist organization, and with Tiny and
Oh
Joey
yeah,
Gibson, who are very
absolutely.
much the number one and number two of the organization, not being white, I had a simple question for him. How do you resolve the issue of calling a group that is founded by a non-white person and their number two is being a non-white person as a white supremacist
Tiny.
organization? Yeah, it's like when they're not led by a white person who doesn't have any intrinsic values or basis in their chapters of white supremacy. How do you kind of mesh these together? And he goes like, I actually know you, blah blah blah, and then he goes to the backstory of like, I actually met this guy before, da da da. So we end up sitting down and talking about this stuff, and he's like, you're actually not as bad as I was expecting. I saw the white skin and the bald head, and I thought you were a skinhead neo-Nazi, blah blah blah. So he actually ended up writing about me because I had been doxxed about 1,000 times already as being a neo-Nazi or some shit. And in the end of it, if you are in the presence of it, you've seen me in concert with people who that I wholeheartedly disagree with on the white nationalist and white supremacist side. You've seen me argue with these people and primarily win. I would say personally I won. But just because you're in concert, or you must be in concert with them, or not necessarily concert with them, you must be in their presence, because I've used this statement for a good long time. You've heard me argue this before. When did we as Americans become so intellectually lazy that we have allowed any kind of a foothold for white supremacists to gain an intellectual upper hand on their philosophical opponents?
Well,
How?
and the question you have to ask, and here I'll defer to the eminent Hitchens. How can you be so sure that the white nationalists are wrong if you never hear what they have to say? How do you know that the Earth is round? Come to think of it, how can I prove that it's not some donut or hollow or Earth or whatever? Am I sure the Holocaust really happened? Well, what's to say that these white nationalists are wrong about this? I suppose I may as well out myself in this channel. I spent, 2.5, 3 years in white nationalist circles. And it took me that long to formulate my counter argument to white nationalism, and it hasn't been sufficiently answered. So I can feel like I can leave that world in good conscience. Finally, because it was very uncomfortable, as you can imagine. The reason I got in there in the first place, and I think this ties us back to the whole libel and this whole conversation is about having conversations with people you disagree with puts you in their company and therefore makes you an ally. It's like some of us aren't wired that fearfully. Yeah. Some of us enjoy the challenge and the debate and the argument. And I, as a free speech extremist, I suppose you could say, was of the belief that free speech was meaningless if it doesn't defend the fringe elements. And the people being censored at the time were these white nationalists and white supremacists, and who as a group tend to have all kinds of weird issues. I should throw that out. Just while we're on the subject.
Yeah. And this is why when you and I first met, like I don't mean to out you during any of this. You and I met myself, during that time frame.
Yeah.
I know. So you and I met during that time frame when you were clearly associated with a group who would be now identified as white supremacist in nature. And the thing is that
I never was, but I was. Yeah.
Like your belief structure when you were associated with them, there's a reason I stuck around you and not any of the other people, is because when you and I had these kind of conversations, they were deep. We can acknowledge some of the arguments on their side and say, okay, out of the 10 statements you just said, about half of one of them is actually correct. Okay. And I can acknowledge that one thing being correct. For some reason, this weird combative nature that we've garnered ourselves into, which is if I oppose this person, I must oppose 100% of everything they said.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's just simply not true.
and the crazy thing was, we were at about the time that I ditched not just that world, but even the peripheral side group that I had helped form. The exact opposite thing was happening, or I should say the exact mirror thing was happening. I was getting accused of having bad judgment for reading the New York Times. Merely associating myself by hearing what they had to say was equivalent to, in some sense, moving towards taking their side on something. Don't you know that they're the enemy? It was a very
Yeah.
God damn it! Like, is there anywhere we can have just talk about things anymore?
And you must remember that, I mean, both sides of this coin has a lot of similarities to cultish mentality. And a lot of times it's severing your connection with people who are close to you in order to, replace them as a substantial representative for your life. So, I mean, you see people who like in cults, especially like let's say Scientology, they specifically go after people who are mentally in anguish to ensure that they can separate them from their friends, separate them from their family, and replace them as kind of that paternal
fill that
figure
role
community. Yeah, exactly, to fill the void. And when they do fill that void, suddenly everything, like even in Mormonism, I personally think that Mormonism is in that same line as a cult, because it's no longer like schismed to the point of everybody else, like you need to stay inside this singular community and keep this really big community only to ourselves. But you literally, if you are incentivized to separate from your family if they are not Mormon, and they used to be Mormon and they no longer are Mormon, they're no longer wanted by any member of the group. They are completely cast out.
Oh,
So
I'm gonna
cultish mentalities.
I'm gonna stick up for Mormons, and I take your point as a broad thing, especially as it applies at the political level. Mormonism, I feel obliged to defend, because what little I've dug into their theology, their cult is, broadly speaking, a family cult. It is a cult of family making. And there are some extreme forms of Mormonism that are like not LDS, that are more like fundy type groups. And I've met people who've come out of Mormon fundamentalist churches, not pleasant places. Very, very scary, actually, in some cases. But the broad Mormon church,
Yeah.
I feel like they create family cults within their wards. And the usual definition of cults that are used is like, oh, they separate people from their family. It's like, but if your cult is your family, who are you being separated from? you know, it's a very it's the best kind of cult, I guess.
And they don't always, and don't get me wrong, don't get me wrong, they try to, but the thing is that more often than not, if you look at almost any faith, and I'm going to call it faith and not just necessarily religion, if you look at almost any faith, not a cult, you see them really try to encourage that family unity and the family lineage, even if they're not necessarily followers of the faith. But if you look at Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Lutheranism, and a whole bunch of others, even the Catholic orthodoxies, a lot of them focus in family is important regardless of whether or not they follow the faith. Okay, Islam is the only one that kind of skews out of that, where like they still want you to have and love your family, but if they're infidels, that's kind of a shady issue, and they're like, And there are some working on it where, because it's non-centralized, you see some people saying like, yeah, you should love your family no matter what, and other people are like, yeah, by the way, you should behead them. But,
I have a different take on Christianity, and in particular based on my reading of the text. It's not very popular among Christians, but I think Christianity, apart from Mormonism, is actually pretty anti-family.
Is this the portion? Yeah, is this the portion in Holy Nihilism where it's literally anti-family?
Yes. I make the and I'm pretty sure I'm alone in this belief, but I can't see any way to read the text where Christianity isn't fundamentally anti-family.
Well,
and you could say the same of Buddhism too, but less directly.
Sure, but I also go by primarily the main teachings and rather outside of the text. I actually find that the reading of religious scripture in almost any faith is a minority now. If contemporary belief structures, it is a minority of practicing the faith.
Most of what you hear in
which case
Christian sermons has almost nothing to do with the Bible. Most of what you hear in sermons is just good, just like what we might call practical psychology. And that's great.
Yeah. And see, this is why I talk about and that's why modern day American Islam doesn't really focus on beheading infidels. I've actually gotten to sit in on a mosque during their prayer sessions and during their sermons, and I was invited in. I got to sit it's not in chairs, you're actually on your knees and your butt. But when I was sitting there, it's actually rather peaceful. It was really, really nice. Maybe they skewed it because there was a white boy in there, but
you want to hear a funny Islam story? When I was at college,
sure.
I attended Muslim Student Association meetings for about 3 or 4 months. That they were the ones I learned that if you want to keep a good group together, you got to do one thing: bring food.
Feed them.
Bring free food. Yep. And they just had it down. They had it nailed. But the thing that one of the foods that they brought was pepperoni pizza. And it took me a while to realize, wait a second, I'm not sure pepperoni is beef. I'm pretty sure it's got other stuff in it, but I didn't bring it up at the time.
Yeah, and so this is actually why the Sikhs actually do really, really well. Have you ever seen it's a gigantic temple over in India where they feed 50,000 people a day.
Oh geez, no, I have not.
Oh, and it's for free.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah. So I'll try to find the video for you. But literally, if you watch it, there's this huge temple that it's a church. It's a Sikh service where I think there's 1,000 volunteers who are going at any given time, and all they do is feed people from morning until night. They have people who are coming in for shifts, and it's a huge part of their faith to go in there, do dishes, cook naan, cook the chickpeas, and cook food. And when people are coming in, it doesn't matter your income, it doesn't matter your family association, it doesn't matter even if you follow the faith. If you come, you will receive food. End of story.
Interesting. I'm just looking at our video and realizing we've strayed slightly from economic destruction and elections, but that's okay. It's been
always do. We always do.
We always do. We never really know. It's just a starting point. But we didn't talk about Homer. Look at that. Mission accomplished.
You just brought it up.
Yeah, it doesn't count if you're bringing it up in absentia. You're like, oh, look at what we didn't talk about. The elections.
You almost went into it because you were talking about the heroistic areas.
I didn't say the word hero either. Look at me.
You did too.
No, I didn't.
You did. I disagree with you.
I don't think so. But we'll go back and re-listen to it later. So, moral of the story.
You can finally listen to your very slurred speech.
Oh God, yeah. I need to figure out something better than Skype. I'm gonna blame Skype here because I've had good internet elsewhere.
Oh.
But
we can definitely try Discord.
Or Discord, yeah. I'll have to re-download that. So it sounds like the takeaway here is that we're all going to hell in the handbasket because Biden may or may not become president and elections are screwy. But fortunately, our current president seems to have enough lawfare experience to just sue his way into maintaining victory even against what is probabilistically a fraudulent election. We can't say that with certainty. It just looks that way. We'll find out, I'm sure, over the next couple weeks or so. Time will tell.
I really encourage you to watch the interview of Rod Blagojevich. Every single thing, everything that I see points to him.
Oh yeah, and the tragedy is he's not evidence of anything. Proof, I should say. He is evidence. He's not proof, but he's a lot of smoke. And as to sort of go back to the whole libel case thing, it's like we, not being in a court of law, are not obliged to withhold our beliefs to only those things that are beyond a reasonable doubt. We can look at the evidence that we have, even if it isn't proof positive, and gauge what we think is more probabilistic, which thing is more likely to be the case. And the crazy thing that Scott Adams brought up is that Homeland Security has said this is the most secure election in U.S. history. And he said, what a funny thing to say, because that statement could be 100% true, could be absolutely true, and there still could have been massive targeted fraud. Kind of an uncomfortable implication. The most secure election in history, and we still have fraud, but it just means all the other ones had fraud as well.
Or even worse. Congratulations.
Right. Yeah. But who knows?
That it reminds me, up in Washington, they were doing up in Seattle especially, they were talking about the whole defund the police. Mm-hmm. Their response rate to emergency calls that were of violent nature was 3%. Was 3%. No, 6%. Sorry. It was 6% call rate, like response rate. And they were saying, like, well, if they defund it by 50%, like, oh no, they'll only make it to 3% of all the calls that are violent in nature and emergency calls. Oh no, what a huge change. We all hate this place.
Yeah. It's I think of Seattle as like Camelot in Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Like Camelot. It's a silly place. Let's not go there.
Yeah, I actually think I need to show